I'm Tom Telford. This is a Lift and Make Lighter podcast. Today we are in studio, the Center for Change studio, aka Nicole Hawkins' office. So grateful to be here with you. Start us off, kick us off. Tell us about you, Center for Change, and why Center for Change is being so impactful in the mental health space in Utah today.
Yeah. Welcome to my office. I've been in this office for 26 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've been here at the Center for Change for 26 years. So I'm a licensed psychologist, and Center for Change is actually the second oldest eating disorder program in the country. And a lot of people don't really know about us here in Utah because unfortunately we don't have to do a lot of advertising, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
We take patients from all over the country. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and then tell you a little bit about the Center for Change and why I'm so passionate and maybe why I've been here so long. So I'm recovered from an eating disorder myself. I've been recovered 34 years. I had anorexia, and then I had bulimia, and then I had binge eating disorder. Eating disorders are a lot of times on a continuum. It's never just kind of one straight diagnosis. They can change over time. I started off as a really anxious kid. A lot of psychologists say eating disorders in the DSM, that's the diagnostic manual, they say, well, eating disorders shouldn't even be under an eating disorder diagnosis. They should be under anxiety. I don't know if I would completely say that, but you could argue that up to 80% of people with eating disorders have anxiety. I just remember as a little kid sitting on the couch waiting for my mom to come home and counting cars. And by the time I'd get to the fifth car, if my mom wasn't home, I assumed my mom was dead. I didn't know that was anxiety. I just thought all kids did that. So as a young child, that's the sign of an anxiety disorder. You're a worrier. I was a perfectionistic kid. I had to have straight A's. I had to do everything right. I was harm avoidant. So when you see a lot of kids that develop eating disorders, they're very perfectionistic. They worry. What we find with this population is when they start restricting their diet, their anxiety goes down. They actually feel better. The problem is, though, is that anxiety starts to come back. So they have to do more and more and more behaviors to bring that anxiety down. Well, now that anxiety is coming back. So what happens? I have to do more and more behaviors. So that's how the eating disorder can develop. So in my case, I developed an eating disorder in college. When we look at when eating disorders typically can occur, in the research we call those the modes, around puberty and around 18 or 19. So I fell into that later period. So individuals in puberty, if they went through puberty earlier than their peers or later than their peers, they're very vulnerable to eating disorders. And then that college age, that transition age. And so that's when I fell in. I did not have an eating disorder in high school. I knew a friend that had an eating disorder. I didn't even understand it. I thought, why would someone have an eating disorder? I went to a local high school here in Salt Lake. I worked on the governor's campaign. I worked on Senator Orrin Hatch's campaign. I took AP political science. I wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to be a politician. I'm so glad I'm neither one of those. But that was my passion, right? So my senior year, I went to Washington, D.C. That's what I was planning on doing. Then fast forward to my freshman year of college, I went out of state to Northern California to a private college. And I got there and I instantly felt like I didn't belong. Now remember, I'm a highly anxious person. I felt like I wasn't smart enough to be there. I felt like I shouldn't be there. To top it off, they put all the freshman women in a large auditorium and they told us, don't gain the freshman 15. You don't want to get the Benson butt. That was the name of our cafeteria. Now that still happens across college universities and campuses still. That they talk about the freshman 15. That is not a thing. I have an Instagram and I don't post on Instagram anymore. And I may get to that in a little bit. The freshman 15 is not a thing. Our high school body is not our adult women body. Women's bodies are still growing and developing. I didn't know that though. If we want to call it anything, we can call it the freshman 4. because our bodies are still developing and changing. I didn't know that. So I'm a worrier. I thought, you know what? I will lose 15 pounds so that when I gain the freshman 15, I'll be even. Well, 25% of dieters that go on their first diet develop a full-blown eating disorder. That was me. So I developed this full-blown eating disorder my freshman year of college. I started running. I started counting all my calories. I started weighing myself. I didn't know I had an eating disorder. I just thought I was being healthy. And so as I started restricting my body and losing weight and getting thinner and thinner and thinner, thinking I was becoming what society wanted, the biggest thing I lost is my voice and my power as a woman, and losing my brain. We lose our memory. We lose our concentration. So over the years, I got sicker and sicker and sicker. We start to binge eat. You can start to purge. The eating disorder can change hands. So I guess the good news is after a few years, I learned I was crazy. I knew I was very, very ill. I changed my major to psychology. I eventually went to graduate school. I eventually recovered, ended up being a psychologist, still had no intent of specializing in eating disorders, but ended up doing a postdoc here at the Center for Change, and I've never left. Back when I had my eating disorder, there were no eating disorder treatment centers in the country. I would have never been able to come to a place like this. And back when I had my eating disorder, they blamed eating disorders on parents. They said parents caused eating disorders. We know that is not the case. Our parents do not cause eating disorders. So if you're a parent out there listening, you did not cause your child's eating disorder. If we want to blame parents, we can say it's genetics passing it down. But what we're actually passing down is probably that anxiety gene, maybe some of that depression, but we're not actually passing down an eating disorder. If anorexia runs in your family, you're 12 times more likely to have an eating disorder in your family. If bulimia runs in your family, you're 8 times more likely to have an eating disorder in your family. But it's probably that anxiety. And so we like to say that genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. When we look at our environment, diet culture is a big part of the environment. So we know that up to 90% of all women diet. For men, you guys are much harder to talk about dieting. It's anywhere from 47 to 72% of men diet. Why do we not know the rates for men? Because you guys don't talk about it. Women, if they go on a diet, they post about it. They're talking about it. Men, they don't really feel the need to talk about their diets. They could go on a diet, no one would know. But women usually talk about it. So dieting, definitely, the diet culture is an environmental thing. There's a lot of reason to believe that for someone like me, if I would have never went on a diet, I maybe would have never developed an eating disorder. So diets are definitely an influence. And then we have all the media pressure out there. So when I was in graduate school, I actually did my dissertation on the thin ideal. And we know models over the years have been getting thinner and thinner and thinner. So I did my dissertation in the 90s, and that was actually known as the period of heroin chic, because models were so thin, they were actually giving them narcotics and heroin and different drugs to make them look that thin. And it got to a period where the models were so emaciated, they had black under their eyes, that became a look that Calvin Klein models even looked like that.
Yeah.
Because that was a look. Then we went through a period where models started looking better. But when I did my dissertation, I did a clinical study. I had women that had eating disorders. I had normal college women. I exposed them to 30 images from Vogue, Glamour, and Cosmopolitan, 30 images for 30 minutes. Showed them these images of thin models. I had 6 psychologists on my committee. After the women looked at these 30 images for 30 minutes, their anxiety went up, their depression went up, their body hatred went up. That my committee of 6 psychologists came back to me and said, Nicole, if we knew your research was this dangerous and harmful to young women, we would have never have let you do your research. Now that was 30 images of thin women for 30 minutes. What are our daughters and what are young girls exposed to now on social media?
It's not 30 minutes.
We can't even quantify, right? Because the research actually says that young girls right now are on media 9 hours and 43 minutes a day. Right now. They get 247 notifications a day right now. That the average American, you and me, we're on our phones 2.5 months a year if we're going to take it. 2.5 months a year. That's how much we're on our phones.
Yeah, it's unreal. We need to come back to that.
Yes.
But if it's okay, before
Yes.
we do it, because I want to dive into that, I want to talk about the Surgeon General, because there obviously is this volume of time spent is having an impact. And the Surgeon General gave a very stark warning, this last year. But if you go back to your own story, when you think about the diet that you first went on and going from the diet that you began to your own kind of uncovered eating disorder, did it become an eating disorder because you saw positive results from the diet? Meaning, was it working and it reinforced doing the behavior?
Oh, absolutely. Because at first I thought I had all this willpower and I felt it was amazing and it made me feel better because I'm a highly anxious person and it brought my anxiety down. I got results and people noticed the results.
Yeah, the external was there, right?
Everyone was
It was
saying,
reinforcing, Nicole's good at this.
Yes, you look really good. Oh, you're so disciplined. I wish I could eat like you. I wish I could run as much as you are. So you get all this external validation for everything you're doing.
Yeah.
Because we compliment people when they lose weight. We compliment people when they're out there running. We're giving people all this praise. So then you say, well, people are noticing. I need to keep this up. Yeah. So I felt this pressure to keep it up. What was interesting is when people then were noticing I was losing too much weight and commenting that I was losing too much weight, that didn't seem to bother me. I just wanted to keep on losing weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you described, I loved how you used your hands there to describe it, but you were talking about when you were seeing results, your anxiety would come down. Would you associate that with control? That was, when you can control something.
I call it the illusion of control.
Okay.
So you really think when you're in an eating disorder that you control it. But the truth is you don't. And so, but before I worked here, I was actually worked at the VA Medical Center, and I was training to be a neuropsychologist. So when neurosurgeons were actually doing brain surgery, I was in the room helping map out when they removed a tumor, how that would impact their frontal lobe and their prefrontal cortex. So I was really into the brain. So what we know is when an individual develops an eating disorder, or let's say they're an alcoholic, or let's say they have a drug abuse problem, their prefrontal cortex, that's the front of our brain, that's like our executive function, that's like our CEO of our brain, knows, is this a good thing to do? Is this a bad thing to do? Our impulse control, it makes us think about consequences of our action. That part of our brain literally stops lighting up. So I could show you brain scans right now and I could get them out of my desk, but that part of our brain stops lighting up. So even though I thought I was in control, my executive functioning of my brain was no longer lighting up. That's why when we're in an eating disorder, we're not in control, but we think we are. We can't control our impulses. We lose our ability to have empathy. We get very, very rigid in our behaviors. That's why everyone that has an eating disorder, we can predict what they're going to do. They're not unique and special. Everyone on my units do all the same behaviors because their prefrontal cortex isn't lighting up. That's adolescents. Their brain does not fully develop their prefrontal cortex until 25. So that's why if you're a parent and you have a child with an eating disorder, you're going to have to give them a lot of support and a lot of structure until they're 25 because their brain is not even fully developed.
Yeah.
So to me, an eating disorder is an illusion of control. I actually thought I had chose to have an eating disorder, and I actually believed I could recover when I wanted to. Kind of the irony.
I can see the development in younger years, why the brain is undeveloped and why that may be impactful. But what is it about an eating disorder that turns off that executive function? Is it just literally starvation?
Yeah, and you're not accessing it because you stop accessing that part of your brain. So it literally stops lighting up. Just like if you were abusing alcohol, you're just not accessing all those higher, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yeah.
you're not accessing it. And so that's why working with individuals with eating disorders can become so frustrating. I like to share, I've been here at the Center for Change for 26 years, but I have only been the CEO for 6 years. I was over the inpatient unit. I've had lots of roles here, and I reluctantly became the CEO. I don't really like being a CEO, but it's fine. I still run groups.
Ditto.
Right. I like doing clinical care. So, but since I've been CEO, I've had cancer twice, and pretty aggressive cancer. So when I've had cancer, the treatment team gives you what you have to do for cancer. And I had to have surgery, and I was going to have to, I was going to have to change my lifestyle. And what was so ironic is the second time I had cancer, I was going to have surgery on my stomach. Now, in my eating disorder, all I cared about, and the only way I measured myself, was my stomach. That's all I cared about. So the second time, when I see that I was going to have surgery on my stomach, and my stomach was going to be a little disformed, I looked at that list of everything my treatment team told me to do, and guess what I did? Everything on that list. Because guess what? I didn't want to die of cancer. Now, when I had my eating disorder, though, my treatment team gave me my list of everything I had to do, and this is just like all my patients in here. And I was supposed to take medications. I was going to have to eat food I didn't want to eat. I was going to have to gain weight, and oh my gosh, my stomach was going to have to change the way I looked. And I took that list, and I wadded it up, and I threw it away. And I said, that doesn't apply to me. I'm the exception. I'll get better when I want. I'm in control. Now, when someone has cancer, do they say, I'll get better when I want? I'm in control?
Yeah.
When we have mental illnesses, for some reason, we think we're in control.
Right.
That's the frustrating.
Why is that? From your perspective, 26 something years
because my
in this.
prefrontal cortex wasn't lighting up. So this is the frustration. If you're working with a loved one that has a mental illness, this is why we have to wrap our arms around them. This is why we have to support them. And if you're a loved one with someone suffering with them, you can't give up on them. And this is why they have to be in therapy, and you have to have them involve you in therapy, even though they will push you away. And this is why I'll never give up on anyone, because we have to be there to support them, because they're going to crumple up. I am the treatment plan always. I am their treatment plan. They will crumple me up and they will throw me away, but I will not give up on them. So that's why I'm so passionate. That's why I stay here. That is why so many of my team members, we have, and for our corporation, we have lots of hospitals. We have the most tenured staff out of all the hospitals because we care so much about what we do. Because we see people get better, but you can't give up on them. Even though they're going to push us away, and even though they're going to throw us away, we have to know that they're actually not in control, even though they think they do. And so that's why it can be so frustrating if you love someone and you care about someone with a mental illness. Now, lots of my staff have recovered from an eating disorder. They're not as open as I am. I think it's very important for me to be open and vulnerable so we can show them that a full recovery is possible.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, they used to not believe a full recovery was possible. They used to say you can't fully recover. So when I used to hear that, I thought, well, why try? If you can't fully recover, then I'm not going to try. We now know you can fully recover, and the majority of people do. So now that you know that's possible, you have to, though, dive in with both feet. you have to give it everything you have, right?
Yeah.
And so we're here to support them. And that's what I think is so special about the Center for Change and makes us different from most treatment centers across the country is here we have all levels of care. So we'll individualize it to whatever they need. We have inpatient, we have residential, we have day patient, we have IOP, we have outpatient, we have an outpatient medical clinic, all in one location in Orem, Utah.
Yeah.
No one else
Which
really
is
has
amazing to me.
Yeah.
The more I learn about the industry and more importantly, the actual eating disorder and what is needed, I recognize how complex it really is and how important it is to have a team, that it's not one person, that it is a team of individuals. Take us through that. When you think of someone beginning their journey and starting, they may be at that denial stage, but their care team, parent, or whoever is saying, no, we really got to address this. How does it begin? What are the barriers to begin? And then you just described all of these resources Center for Change has. Can you describe why they exist and why the differences in all of them?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you think someone is struggling, I think it's important to get them an assessment, and it's important to get them an assessment with a specialist. Here's the problem though. 0.04% of therapists in the country specialize in eating disorders. We're a rare breed. There's not that many of us. So getting them assessed with someone that actually knows eating disorders is pretty critical. We offer free assessments. So that is one thing. And then knowing even when they get assessed, there's going to be a lot of resistance to care. Even when I came to work here, I had been recovered for 7 years. We were the first program in the country to do something what's called intuitive eating. My first day of work here, we were actually a 16-bed facility. I had to shadow the patients. So intuitive eating is a concept, and I recommend this for anyone, even if you don't have an eating disorder. It's a concept, and there's books about it and a workbook. It's a concept of all foods fit. There's no good or bad foods. We don't label foods as junk food. But my first day of work here happened to be challenge day, where the patients eat challenging snacks. It was cheesecake challenge day. So I'm shadowing the patients. It meant I was supposed to eat 3 pieces of cheesecake in one day. So you have to understand, I grew up in a very dieting family, very health food conscious family. I had never had soda. I had never had sugar cereal. I had never had white bread. I'm 7 years recovered. I come work here and I'm supposed to eat 3 pieces of cheesecake in one day. And no offense, and excuse my language, but I said, I looked at the lead dietitian who's still here. When I became CEO, I recruited her back. And I said, there's no way in hell I'm eating another piece of cheesecake. These people in Podunk, Orem don't know what they're doing, and they're feeding the patients junk food. I didn't understand it. But I'm very transparent, and I thought, if I'm going to work here and I'm going to ask this of the patients, I better be willing to try it myself.
Yeah.
So I had to learn to eat differently because I was still kind of a healthy eater. I had to learn that a healthy eater means all foods fit and all foods in moderation.
Yeah.
So being open to that. So we do assessments here, but knowing that your loved one or even yourself as a parent could be like, hold it. No, this is really different. This is a different approach. So we do assessments. We look at what level of care they need. We offer that to them. And if there's some resistance, we try to see what will fit for them, where we can get them into our model. Because recognizing for some people, they're going to go, no, there is no way I'm coming into 24-hour care. So could I get them an outpatient? Could they be seen in my outpatient medical clinic? I'm just going to try to see where I can at least get them in the door, get a foot in, get them to trust us. Make sure they're medically stable though. Make sure their labs are okay, their EKG's okay. What people aren't aware is eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness. They were number one. And then during COVID, we went to number two. Number one now is opioid deaths. So during COVID, opioid deaths went to number one, eating disorder deaths went to number two. That's only eating disorder deaths we count. So that's only eating disorder deaths we count. Those are only deaths attributed to anorexia. Only deaths where the person is underweight and they die of starvation. That's only 6% of individuals with eating disorders are actually underweight. Wow. Bulimia is far more deadly than anorexia, but we don't count those deaths. So if I'm working with a patient that just restricts, they don't do anything else. I'm not that kind of doctor, but I have all those doctors on my staff. They can look at their labs, they can look at their EKG, and they could predict when they could go into organ failure or when they could have a cardiac arrest. If you're a patient or if you have a loved one that purges, that takes laxatives or takes diuretics, I did all those behaviors. And I would sometimes do all those behaviors in one day. We used to say, well, it would maybe take a week of them doing those behaviors for their electrolytes to get off and they'd have a cardiac arrest. And then they came back and said, no, maybe 3 days. Maybe 3 days of them doing that behavior, they could have a cardiac arrest. Now they're saying like 1 day. 1 day of an individual purging or taking laxatives or taking diuretics could be enough for their electrolytes to get off balance, and they'll just have a heart attack. Those deaths are not counted. So I go lobby Congress every year. Families go lobby Congress every year because we want those deaths to count. They still don't. I had no idea bulimia was so deadly when I had it. When I would get chest pains and my heart would hurt, I'd just be like, well, maybe I shouldn't work out today. I didn't think I could die. I really had no idea. And so we really do not know the true death rates of eating disorders. We have no idea. And the other thing too, if you're a sufferer and you purge blood, you could think, well, maybe I have an ulcer. No, maybe you have a tear in your esophagus and you could bleed out before you can even get surgery. We don't know that either. So eating disorders are so deadly. And again, it's the second highest mortality rate of only the deaths we count. And I haven't even talked about ARFID or binge eating disorder. So how deadly are they really?
Yeah, you're not counting the largest percentage of that.
Eating, yeah. Because binge eating disorder is the largest percentage of eating disorders.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about death rates from that.
So is the correlation of mortality or the highest mortality associated with them tied to the potential for heart attack, or what are the other risks that occur that we're not necessarily accounting for that exist? I mean, why the danger so high? What is actually occurring in the body or in the disorder itself that is leading people down a road that is so dangerous?
Well, with anorexia, of course, it's going to be the heart attack and the organ failure. But the other big risk we're seeing with all eating disorder patients now is the suicide risk. Because if you have anorexia, you're 31 times more likely to make a suicide attempt. If you have bulimia, you're 7 times more likely now to die by suicide. If you're a male, you have double the risk. And if you're in the LGBTQ plus population, 58% have considered suicide. They're our most vulnerable population. So we have so many risks for this population. They're one of the highest risk populations. I think one reason I stay at the Center for Change, honestly, I would not want to treat an eating disorder patient on an outpatient basis. They're too scary. Between the suicide risk and the medical complications, this is a scary population to treat. The medical risk, and you send them through the ER, the ER physicians are not even running the right labs on them to even know their labs are off. So that's the most frustrating thing we have, is we send them to the ER, they don't even run the right labs. So if you have someone and you're in the Salt Lake, Utah Valley area, please bring them to our outpatient medical clinic where we'll at least run the right labs. Right. because no other physicians honestly, there's probably only 4 physicians in the entire Utah area that know to run the right labs.
Yeah.
Which is pretty scary.
It is scary. And I just want to, echo that voice that we have a couple women at LÉVO. They've become known for at least knowing the right labs and assessment to do. And it's interesting because we are in Draper and Kaysville. We're expanding throughout the state, but it's amazing how much funnel goes to really a handful of organizations who even know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of shocking. That has been surprising to me, but very real. So I just want to echo that point that there's not a lot of organizations or individuals
that even
who know how to do and address this. Why the suicide ideation? So what's the psychology of someone with, an eating disorder who gets to the point where, life is not worth facing anymore? What are you hearing, or what is that?
Well, I'll use myself again as the example. So remember, I had the anxiety. So my anxiety is going up. So I'm doing tons of behaviors to bring my anxiety down, but then my anxiety is going up. I'm doing more and more behaviors. So now my anxiety is the worst it's ever been. My behaviors are the worst they've ever been. So I have full-blown anxiety. I have a full-blown eating disorder. And then I like to say I started sprinkling in OCD, right? Now I have OCD, eating disorder, OCD, I'm like anxiety. And now if you have bulimia too, you're going to start even getting into more reckless behaviors. So you can start seeing alcohol, drug abuse. If you have bulimia, you're at high risk of alcohol, drug abuse, sexual stuff, shoplifting. We're going to put lots of addictions in there now.
Yeah.
So you stay in that cycle for 4 years. The research is going to say the majority of those people now are going to end up with major depression. So now I have anxiety, I have an eating disorder, I have OCD, I have added in all these other little co-problems, and now I have major depression. So now I'm apathetic. I don't even want to get better anymore. I don't even think it's worth it. Why even try?
Yeah.
So then I remember to a point of, it's not even worth it. I don't even care. Now, I never became full-blown suicidal, but I just didn't even care to try. But by the time most patients end up in the Center for Change, they've either had multiple suicide attempts or they're completely apathetic. And that's where we get them.
Yeah. Is it the feeling from them is just a hopelessness?
Yeah.
It's so far gone, I can't imagine.
And when I'm in this cycle, I've lost all my values. I've burned bridges with most people. I don't even know who I am anymore. They've usually lost all their spirituality or their connection with their religion. So everything that's become important to them is no longer important to them. So what do they have?
Yeah.
They don't have anything anymore. And who are they as a person? And they've ruined all their relationships with their families. So they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And who am I? And all these things I said I would never do in life, I've now done them. All these things I said I would never do as a person, I've now done all these things. So I've ruined my life. And again, if I'm a perfectionist and I'm harm avoidant and I don't want to do anything wrong, over here now, I've just done everything wrong. I've ruined my life.
Yeah.
So what do? I've ruined it.
Is there a sense of the people who are in that situation that they just can't live with the shame of self? I mean, yes. What emotions would you describe that? Or, I'm thinking embarrassment, shame, some pretty core things that I think a lot of us struggle with in life. Now it's just this, it's magnified significantly.
I think for some, there can be this anorexia of pride. So if I'm purely anorexic, I can still have some pride in my eating disorder if I'm just anorexic. But if I go to the bulimia where I am binging and I am purging, the shame of that diagnosis and having people know I do those behaviors, that becomes so embarrassing. Especially if I'm then having to steal food, or how am I feeding my addiction?
Yeah.
And am I shoplifting? And am I running up huge credit card debt? How am I feeding my addiction? Am I stealing? In my case, stealing from my roommates? And now all my roommates hate me? And I can't even look them in the eye every morning because they know what I'm doing?
I've never correlated that way, that I'm feeding my addiction, and I've not thought about bulimia that way, that I've lacked self-discipline and I'm doing things to overeat that I then am binging. So that's really interesting to just kind of hear you describe some of the psychology and some of the behavior as an eating addiction.
Yeah.
Is the purging a way to combat it or to control it?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's both. It's both. It's I'm compensating for all the binging, so I'm compensating, but then I get a rush and a release from the purging too. So it's kind of both things.
And is it a feeling of I was undisciplined and now I'm disciplined?
And now I'm controlling. But now I'm also too exhausted, so I'm distracted and I don't have to think about all that stuff.
Yeah.
I've been worried about.
Fascinating to just hear you describe it and to try to think through that in the psychology of someone in those situations. Go back to what you described before about social media and some of the media and the messaging. You talked about your research. Talk about the state of where we're at today and how society is feeding, some incredibly dangerous thinking and self-actualization through just images.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest concern, so I've been since the 90s studying the media, and that's kind of been my passion, is how does the media impact women? Because I think for me, I was impacted by the media in my eating disorder. I can remember having a picture, for example, of Janet Jackson's abs on my mirror. And then I found out her abs weren't real. She had ab implants. And I thought, here I'm aspiring to something that's not even real, right? Like something that's not even, it's made up. It's not even real. And so then all the airbrushing that went on. And so then we knew the airbrushing wasn't real. And so then social media came about. And so we know that, the first iPhone came out in 2007. And so that's when the first iPhone came out. And there's a great book called Generations that came out. And it actually will show, since the first iPhone came out, like our kids aren't dating as much. They're not socializing as much. They're also not drinking as much, which is good. And they're not having sex as much but they're not leaving the house. They're not interacting with people anymore because they're engaged with the phone and they're engaged with social media. And so what's most alarming to me is kind of the trends that we've seen take off with TikTok and what we've seen take off with Instagram, in particular with eating disorders. So what we know kind of happened when Instagram took off in 2010. So Facebook came out in 2006, and I have my own opinions about Facebook because Facebook never started with good intent with women. When Facebook came out, people think, well, it started as a social dating. It was like a way to connect. No, that's not how Facebook started. It was started as a site to rate women. That was originally how it started. So it was started to rate and berate women. That was the original intent of Facebook. So it never, ever had good intent for women. So then Instagram came out in 2010 and it kind of blew up, and Snapchat came out in 2011. So then we kind of went through and we saw eating disorders start picking up every single year from 2010 on. It was significant, and we saw depression in young girls start picking up from 2010. So from 2010 to 2015, we saw this huge surge in depression and eating disorders. And if you're really interested in this, of people in the audience, the book from Dr. Jonathan Haidt, Anxious Generation, he spells it all out. He shows all the research. He goes right into it. But what's so interesting is in 2021, the summer of 2021, a whistleblower so Instagram has 28 people on their team. They're paid $300,000 to $350,000 each. 28 people. They are in charge to monitor 170 million people. They are in charge of all eating disorder, self-harm, and suicide content. That's their job. 28 people. Here at the Center for Change, on any one day, I have 100 patients. I have 310 staff. My 310 staff are in charge of 100 patients. Instagram devotes 28 people to 170 million people. That's their resources. I'm not bitter. It's fine. But anyway,
Efficiency.
yeah,
Efficiency.
right. So she was a member of their 28 member team. Frances Hagen's her name. She left under the Whistleblower Protection Act. She took 100,000 pages of internal documents with her. She turned those over to the Wall Street Journal. They went through all 100,000 pages, and they found that Instagram, in their own words, admitted since Instagram started in 2010, they are intentionally pushing eating disorder content, self-harm content, and suicide content to our daughters and to our granddaughters and to our sisters, to our kids. They're intentionally doing it because they found the more they push that content, the longer young girls stay on that platform. So if you remember, Congress did hearings on this. Even the senator out of Connecticut, he made, with the help of a staffer, he made a fake 13-year-old's Instagram account. He went on and he logged on and made a fake account, logged on to a pro-eating disorder site on Instagram, didn't like it, didn't follow it, just looked at it. The next day, that whole account was all eating disorder content. If you remember in 2021, what did Congress do? Nothing. Nothing happened. There were no regulations put on Instagram. Nothing happened. So families started taking it into their own hands and lawsuits started happening. This has now progressed. These lawsuits started happening. It's now in multi-district litigation is what it's called. And so it's moving forward. And it's now went in front of the judge and it's going forward. We don't think, and I'm involved in this, we don't think we're ever going to eventually win. But what we do hope is that we'll get them to maybe change the algorithm. That is the hope, because they, since being caught in 2021, they've done nothing. In January of 2024, January 9th of 2024, Instagram said they're going to start restricting their content for eating disorders, self-harm, and suicide, but they didn't say what that meant. And then the end of January, they said they would start giving our kids nighttime nudges, that if our kids were on past midnight, they would encourage them to go to bed. And that's really all they've done. Now, they did say they were going to do the teen accounts. That's really not rolled out. So then they invited me personally in October of last year to come on their campus and to be an expert to help give them feedback on how to make their Instagram safer for girls with eating disorders. I really still don't think they have a plan in place to make Instagram safer for our girls.
Yeah.
I think they want to. I think they could turn the algorithm off right now. I think they don't know. I think it's a business model. I think they don't know how to do it and not make money. So I think as parents, as loved ones, we need to encourage our kids to unfollow things, to make smarter choices. The one thing I did, and it's not even a great documentary, it's called Social Dilemma and it's on Netflix. I made my 24-year-old daughter watch it. Because I could tell her to do this. She doesn't really listen to me. But she watched that documentary. At least it got her to turn off her notifications. So she at least doesn't have pop-ups telling her, you got a like, or you got this. So getting them to turn off their notifications can be powerful. If you have a younger child, getting them off social media until they're 16. But Jonathan Haidt, who wrote Anxious Generations, he goes as far as to say that social media does not correlate with mental health problems in young girls. He says it causes it. Now, as psychologists, we're not allowed to say that. That's graduate school 101. You cannot say that.
Right.
He says it. And if you look at the data from 2010 on, suicide rates of our girls have went up. Self-harm has went up. Depression has went up. So as someone that we're licensed at a psychiatric hospital, I sent a 16-year-old girl out that was suicidal. I couldn't get her a bed in the state of Utah. There was no beds. I had to send her to California. That's not okay. That's not okay. So what are we doing to our young girls and how are we protecting them? So I think we need to be more aware. And so that is why I am pretty proud of what Governor Cox is doing, what some of our legislatures are doing. Utah is ahead of the game with some of the laws we're trying to pass to protect our kids. And I think we really need to.
What does protection look like? In your opinion, what should it be?
I think getting the phones out of the school and doing it as a community. My son's school, he goes to a private school, but they lock up the phones during the day, passing legislation to not allow them on social media between a certain age or before a certain age. I think it was just Australia that just said, we're not letting kids on social media before 16. We're just not doing it. Honestly, banning TikTok. Biden talked about it. Trump talked about it. Why won't they ban it? Because it makes a lot of money. There's a documentary on Amazon Prime that's actually called TikTok. It is many years old now. There's a whole section on eating disorders. So in the US, for example, there's no regulations on TikTok. In China, kids can only go on TikTok for 40 minutes a day. Their content in China is all educational. So in China, the number one things kids want to be when they grow up is what? Do you know? Astronauts. Kids in China want to be astronauts. In the US, what's the number one thing kids want to be?
Yeah, YouTuber, an influencer.
Yeah, influencer.
Yeah.
We're afraid TikTok's stealing our data. Oh, they're stealing our data. What are they doing more? They are influencing an entire generation of our youth right in front of us. Right in front of us. So these are things we need to be more aware of as parents of what's going on with our kids.
Yeah.
But we're worried about, well, look at all these businesses tied to it now. Years ago, we were going to ban it. Now we're not banning it. We keep on extending the deadline. Yeah. What are we going to do with this? I gave a talk, it's probably last year. Were you there when I gave the talk to the public nurses, Carrie? So I gave a talk and I was talking about TikTok because I don't know if you're aware, on TikTok, kids will film themselves doing suicide gestures or self-harm acts.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm talking about this and I don't talk about it anymore. A nurse left the room crying. So at the end of my talk, she came back and told me her son's story. He was a high school football star. He got injured. He had never been on TikTok. So he was home from school for 2 weeks. He went on TikTok and the choking challenge was on TikTok. So he saw it. So he did it and he filmed himself doing the TikTok challenge. Well, he passed away doing the TikTok challenge live on TikTok. So she reported it because they claimed it was a suicide. His death was ruled a suicide. It was not a suicide. He was doing the choking challenge. She reported it to TikTok. Would they take the choking challenge off? No, they won't take it off. She got the best attorney in the country to fight TikTok to take it down. They will not take it down. How are we going to protect our kids?
Yeah.
So this is my concern. This is why I feel pretty passionate about we have to do something about social media. I'm coming from the lens of all the damage it's doing to eating disorders. So if my patients here at the Center for Change log on to TikTok at my address, it will give them videos of how to break rules in treatment centers. It will tell them why they should get a feeding tube. And during COVID, it became a trend to go to treatment centers and film yourself with a feeding tube. So everyone wanted to do it. And then I had patients getting their phones and trying to run through my hallways filming live videos so they could post it on TikTok. That was the trend. This is how damaging it can be.
Obviously the business side is incredibly frustrating, super challenging to fight that. The lobby is enormous.
Yeah.
For the legal ramifications involved. Why do you believe parents are not doing anything about it or more about it in their homes? I have a hard time believing, because it's so rampant in media and the implications of social media. So I have a hard time believing so many parents are ignorant to it. But why do you believe, from your perspective, that it's not a stronger conversation in the homes of families?
Well, I'm a parent myself. I have a 17-year-old. I have a 24-year-old. I can't keep up with it myself. And then I run groups here with all the adolescents. They tell me stuff. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard to keep up with. It's evolving. The apps are evolving. The platforms are evolving. I just learned of on the App Store, different apps you can get that teach you how to have an eating disorder, and that you get points to get a corset or to buy a scale. I just learned about that last week. So I think it's hard for parents. It's so much thrown at us. How do we keep up?
Yeah.
It's so much. So I feel for parents, and I think even for the schools and the educators. Here at Center for Change, we have a fully accredited high school, and I just met with our principal yesterday, and he was telling me just all the things they're trying to manage in the schools, and because he's been a principal in the local high schools here. It's hard. So I don't know what to tell parents as a parent myself of a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And that's of a boy. Because boys are not influenced as much, because boys don't compare. Girls compare. So we could have a whole conversation with boys and video games and violence and pornography. That's going to be a whole nother thing if we want to talk about our young boys. But with girls, it's the comparison. And girls are so much more vulnerable to social media because they compare. And that's all social media is about for girls, is the comparison.
We've spoken a lot about girls and women and disordered eating. Is it a fallacy that it is gender specific?
No, we're seeing it so much more with boys. I think the most phone calls I get now, unfortunately, in the state of Utah, and they want me to do something about it, and I don't have the bandwidth right now, is moms calling me about high school wrestlers that are being hospitalized for eating disorders. And the wrestling coaches know these boys are being hospitalized for eating disorders. These boys are trying to go back on the team, and the coaches are not giving them any grace and are wanting them to go back to behaviors because that is the culture. So we're seeing that with boys. So the recent stats are up to 20% of our high school girls are fasting for at least 24 hours now. And up to 8% of our high school boys are fasting for 24 hours. They're just not eating for 24 hours. And we know that the majority of high school kids are not even eating lunch at all. They're just not even eating lunch. And that's boys and girls. So we're seeing the rates of boys now tick up to even the most current rates are saying up to 10% of high school girls are having full-blown eating disorders. Up to 3% of high school boys are having full-blown eating disorders. So that's my big debate now, because we're the property next to us. I'm building 36 more beds. Do I do a male unit? What am I going to do? Because the males, I treat them in outpatient, I treat them in PHP. Do I do a dedicated male unit? Because who's treating our boys? Because they're having eating disorders just as much.
What are the driver comparison, differences between the two? Less comparison, you would say. So what is it for those that do have them? Is it sports? Is it athletics? Is it
definitely can be sports? It used to be it used to be, well, you would maybe have a boy that was teased about his weight when he was younger. That would be a high vulnerability of someone that was going to develop an eating disorder. We definitely can see it tied to certain sports. Of course, wrestlers, track, cross country, football. We see it definitely tied to certain sports. We can see, of course, gay men were labeled as more vulnerable to having eating disorders. But now, kind of across the board, and again, this can be misconstrued, but they say as females are gaining more economic equality, men feel more pressure to look better, to compete. And we see now that men are going to college at lesser rates than females.
Yep.
So now men are feeling this pressure that women have always felt, that I need to compete at a different level. And some of that competing is my body.
Yeah.
And now with this Ozempic craze across the board, as we saw that the models were getting thinner in the 90s, and then we went to this body positivity movement and larger bodies were accepted. Well, that's not the case anymore. Ozempic has now made models' bodies thinner. Everyone's become thinner, including men. So the pressure now is on across the board with all the GLP-1s.
Speak more about that. Is it just that now I can look the way before it was like, there's no chance I'm getting there. I just need to accept self.
Yeah.
And now it's like,
now there's something.
Now there's a chance.
Yeah. But the ironic thing of all this is like GLP-1s are not new. Like the University of Utah was studying Ozempic 20 years ago. It's not new. It's been around for a long time. We know a lot about it. And if you have type 2 diabetes, it can be a game changer for you. Absolutely. But you know why we've all heard about it? You know why it's so popular now? It's because it went viral on TikTok. That's what's so ironic about this whole thing, is it went viral on TikTok. So is this going to be the game changer for us? The general population that wants to lose weight? No, it's not. Because it only works for about 55 weeks. It's not going to work long term. There's a lot of side effects that are going to come with it. Now, Lilly is just finished their third trial of the pill form that they think could be out at the end of the year. Is it going to have as many side effects? I don't know. Maybe it'll be a better alternative. What all these pills are really targeting is the receptor in our stomach that communicates to the receptor in our brain that tells us we're full. Well, if we could eat normally for 90 days, those receptors will start working anyway. So I think eventually we'll find some better alternatives that'll have less side effects. I think the side effects of the GLP-1s are pretty extreme right now.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of medical problems and you're having a lot of medical problems, maybe you consider them. But if you're someone that's not having a lot of medical side effects from being overweight, you should not be considering them. If you're just someone that's like, well, I just want to lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds, I'm going to go on a GLP-1. Probably not a good decision because there's a lot of side effects. But if you have type 2 diabetes and you're experiencing a lot of side effects, they can be a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aside from the physical implications of what it can do on body loss, make the side effects can cause all sorts of symptoms, but what's the psychological effect of it?
It's interesting. For a lot of my patients, whether it's been through gastric bypass surgery or extreme eating disorder or whatever it's been that gets them to lose the weight, and maybe society now accepts them more, they get compliments more, they still struggle to accept themselves. And there's still this fear of people are going to reject me and I'm still not good enough. Because I remember what I used to be and I wasn't accepted.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting. And individuals that have lost a lot of weight after a gastric bypass surgery still kind of say their body image hasn't improved, which is so fascinating to me.
It is.
Yeah, it doesn't improve their body image. And then a lot of times they have the loose skin and it makes them like their body less because of the loose skin. So it's kind of this lose-lose, I think.
The lose-lose.
Yeah.
When someone comes to Center for Change and goes through the healing process, it could be at any level, but when they're going through that process, what is the internal work that you're trying to scaffold as a team, as a staff, to get them to the point where they feel like they are in a wellness position? So oftentimes, there's the physical components of all of this, just the actual eating, not starving anymore, having a healthier relationship with food. But what else is going on in the healing process internally? The psychology of the healing process.
I think so often they think, well, it's about food and it's about calories and it's about me gaining weight or whatever it is. Eating disorders are not about food. They're not about body image. I always think it's ironic that I teach the body image groups. Eating disorders are not about body image. Even though when I had my eating disorder, I was 100% convinced it was about body image. And I was 100% convinced if I just had the body I wanted, everything would be fine. No. I have to be okay with myself internally. And if I can be okay with myself internally, I can accept myself even if I'm not at a body I want. So can I get to that self-acceptance? Can I be okay with myself and my imperfections? And can I accept my body and not want to change it? So can I have balance in my life and be okay if I'm not that great at a lot of things? So I like to present them with this circle, kind of like a wheel, where can we get balance in our life where we're kind of good at a lot of things, but we're not very good at anything? Because if I'm kind of good at a lot of things, then I'm a pretty balanced person. And trying to teach them those concepts.
Yeah.
Of being a well-rounded person. So I always tell them, I'm an okay CEO. I'm an okay mom. If you ask my mom or my son, I kind of suck. Like I'm okay at a lot of things.
Sure.
And that makes me a pretty balanced person. So that way, if one of those things are pulled out of my life, it's not going to completely destroy me. If I was to get fired today, yeah, it's going to suck, but I'm not going to fall apart because I have balance. Yeah. But in my eating disorder, if I stepped on the scale and I gained 3 pounds, I was suicidal because I had no balance. We need balance.
Yeah.
So trying to teach them that.
How hard is that for perfectionists?
And parents sometimes hate me for saying this. I try to teach my patients to be average. I want them to be average. And so I try to teach them that it's okay to be average. But I think so often they think, well, no, I have to be the best. I have to get that trophy. I have to get those straight A's. No, I want you to be average. But do we strive to be average? Probably not.
We don't, for sure. I don't think society rewards it, but there's something there about average is wellness.
Yeah.
Because it does not elevate anxiety.
Yeah.
It does not ramp you up, which is very hard to cope with.
And maybe acknowledging for me to be well and for me to recover, I need to be average. So I always tell them I had multiple opportunities of different places I was supposed to go to graduate school, Ivy League schools. I chose to go to Utah State. I did not go to Harvard or Stanford because I felt that would have been putting me in the frying pan and I would have never have recovered.
Yeah.
Now, did I wimp out and take the easier road? Maybe. But did I recover? Yes. I don't have to put myself in a frying pan to prove I'm good enough. So teaching them, is it okay to be average? What do you have to prove? Can you just be okay?
Yeah. It's an interesting thought of just, that's risk mitigation. If I am more vulnerable to these tendencies, I'm not going to put myself in a situation that would elevate, right, those risks occurring in my life. That makes sense to me. Proactive defense makes a lot of sense to me.
I always joke, well, I've been here for 26 years. I've been offered CEO jobs all over the country. I could take them. Would that be good for my mental health? Probably not.
Maybe in Newport Beach.
Yeah, right.
I mean, sun and ocean. Yeah. I'm digging that.
Yeah. But for my mental health, what's the advantage, right?
Sure.
Like, is there an advantage?
Yeah.
Because it's about life balance and thinking, I'm not really motivated by money or different things. Mm-hmm. You got to balance your mental health. What's more important to you?
What are some of the risks of our society, family culture, society culture, Utah culture, right? There's an anxiousness about it, in my opinion. Maybe I feel it, differently, just upbringing and who, my personality. But I hear often parents are reaching out and saying things like, my teen is getting crushed right now, and they'll describe why. And in my head, it does point back to some of the societal pressures, culture, upbringing. If you're not on track with your schooling at third grade, you're not going to get into college, or, BYU only accepts a 34 on the ACT and 4.0, like all this stuff, right? What do you see?
Oh, I mean, definitely. And I think there's a reason that the second oldest eating disorder program in the country is here in Utah County. There's a reason it's here.
Yeah, there's a market for it.
Yes. Yes. Because of the culture, we have the highest rates of plastic surgery anywhere other than, Orange County. In Utah, per capita, we have the highest rates. So that pressure of perfection and not showing your problems and striving to be the best is definitely here.
Yeah.
It's definitely here. And do you decide to step into that, or do you decide that I'm not going to do that? So I like my motto, and this is my motto I try to teach the patients is, I've been there, I've done that, I choose not to do that anymore. Do I need to live that way anymore? I don't want to live that way anymore. And again, is it taking the easy way out? I don't know. But do I have to run in that race anymore?
How challenging is it for someone who comes for treatment for them to return home to that same environment where anxiousness, perfectionism is pervasive? Like, it's just part of the culture.
I think again, they have to recognize their history. So I have to recognize I've had an eating disorder. I am going to be very vulnerable. I have to know my history. So I ran group with them yesterday, and I told them they have to know their history, and they have to know they're all vulnerable to having substance abuse problems, like to all the addictions. They cannot pretend they're not vulnerable to that. And they're all going to be vulnerable to maybe even being workaholics or whatever, other addictions. So making sure they're always taking care of their mental health, always having self-care, building self-care into their life. So I have to actually make sure I'm doing self-care. That has to be part of my routine.
Yeah.
If not, I'll burn myself out. We do surveys of our employees every single year, And the thing my young workers struggle with the most is resiliency. They burn themselves out. So what do we have to do with our employees? We have to teach them self-care. They have to learn to be more resilient. It's the same thing I have to do with my patients. So what I'm having to do with my patients is the same thing I'm having to do with my staff. How are we going to teach them balance? How are we going to teach them to take care of themselves? If we're all just pushing, when does that match burn out? When are they going to be done? When is that cell phone battery dead? How are you going to recharge your battery? And we've got to teach them that. Because they're eventually going to crash.
Yeah. Got to cope somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Finish with any freestyle wisdom, anything that you see that you're recognizing in the work that you're doing here, maybe in society, but speak to those who may be listening just from your 26 years of doing this. You know, what's on your mind, what's on your heart regarding eating disorders and the mental health state of.
No, I mean, I
today?
think right now I'm just concerned with all the pressure of social media, all the GLP-1s, all of that. I would say make sure you're taking a break from social media. Never go on social media at night. Like, just don't do it. Make sure you're not doom scrolling where you're just doing this. So if you notice you're just doing this, get off. The minute you know you're doing that, stop doing that. And then I'd really encourage you to get the book Intuitive Eating and learn a non-diet approach, because we are just bombarded by those messages. And then just look at your self-care and what are you doing to take care of yourself? Are you doing anything every single day to take care of yourself, to give yourself a break? And then look and see what actual connections you're doing with real people. Or are all your connections over your phone or over Zoom or over, technology? Are you actually connecting with real people? Because that's critical too. And set a goal to actually connect with 3 real people one-on-one, doing something social every single week, I think becomes critical these days.
Are those the behaviors that you're seeing for those who may be trying to recover? That they can't just stop doing certain things. They need to add certain things in.
I
to their
require
lives.
it.
Okay.
I require them to do 3 social things a week. I require them to cut their social media time down. For my teenagers, I require them to be out of their rooms at night, to have their doors open. So we kind of do these requirements to get them back engaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. I require family activities once a week, kind of these changing your lifestyle kind of things.
It seems like that's one of the main primary warning signs for families when we get asked, what should we be looking for? What are the risks? Isolation tends to be one that is fairly obvious. To your point, if they're spending 9 to 10 hours a day on their phone, where are they doing that at?
Yeah. And they're usually in their rooms.
Yeah, they're typically not in the kitchen, scrolling for 10. They recognize in their own behavior, this is excessive, and so I need to hide it.
Yeah.
They have already kind of started to hide, right? Just where they're spending time. And so that makes sense that to have behaviors where you're getting out of the isolation of it. So, well, thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how often you get thanked, being in the mental health space or Center for Change, but we know the impact you're having. We here at LÉVO, that Center for Change is a leader in the industry, not just in Utah. So thank you for all that you do and for having us here today.
Thanks for coming and spending some time with me.
Absolutely. We'd love to do it again.
Okay. Thank you. That would be great.